The scream didn't come from the yard or the chow hall. It came from the block with the thickest doors. A guard hit his radio twice and ran, keys clacking against his belt. By the time he reached the cell, the view was already burned into everyone's memory. A famous inmate on the floor, still, the noise of the alarm turning the whole prison into one long siren. In a place built to lock danger in, danger had found a way to end a life. The news would say the name in bold letters by morning. But inside, the men already knew. The rule had been broken again. Even the most notorious criminals could be murdered behind bars. How did it happen here? How did it happen so many times in so many places that officers could list them from memory the way truckers list highways? Earlier. Prison looks solid from the outside. Tall walls, razor wire like shining thorns, towers that watch the world without blinking. But behind those walls is a city that never sleeps, where time moves slow and tempers move fast. In this city, scores are kept, power is traded, and stories spread like smoke. Some stories fade, others never do, the ones about notorious inmates who didn't make it to the end of their sentence because someone ended it for them. The file room kept those stories in cardboard boxes. On their spines, names, dates, units, causes. A young records clerk named Daniel used to stack them in neat rows, not to be nosy, but because order was the only thing he could control. Some boxes were thin, some bulged with paper. He learned early that the thickest files were not always for the longest sentences. Sometimes they were for the shortest, because trouble found the person fast. On a winter afternoon, a senior officer with a careful way of speaking motioned for Daniel to help him carry a stack. "These are the ones people ask about," the officer said, "when they want to know how things real."
The hardest math we do here is figuring out which is which in time to keep the clock from running out. Not every notorious inmate was attacked. Some lived out their days in quiet corners, monitored, and moved like chess pieces that could never be taken. But too many didn't, and what happened next in each case wasn't just a crime scene. It was a storm, reports, questions, TV vans outside the gates, families calling, lawmakers asking how, why, who. The loudest storms carried into the blocks. Even inmates who claimed not to care would lower their voices and say, "Did you hear?" Word could move from one end of a prison to the other faster than a golf cart. The story changed a little with each retelling, but the core stayed. Someone known to the world had been murdered by someone unknown to the world. That winter, the prison where Daniel worked had its own friction point. It wasn't a single famous name this time. It was a list, a handwritten list folded into a commissary receipt found in a cell search because a rookie checked under the mattress one extra time. On it, someone had scribbled 20 names. Half of them were mean-nothing names that read like a bus roster. But 5 had a glow around them. Even in pencil, they were the kind of names that made phones ring before anyone had dialed. The captain who read the list didn't show it to many people. He showed it to the warden in a small circle who knew how to keep their faces still. "This is either a scare tactic," he said, "or a map." "Either way," the warden said, "we reroute traffic." Traffic meant who went to chow with who, which yards opened at what times, who got moved to protective custody, who stayed in general population, and which officers stood where when doors slid open. It meant watching the camera grid for dead corners and filling them with human eyes. It meant more check-ins for certain inmates, the kin, of check-ins that annoyed them until the day they were grateful. One of the names on the list belonged to a man who had made a lot of noise before he ever saw a cell. He had stood in courtrooms like a person asking to be remembered for the worst reasons. He bragged on the outside and stayed loud on the inside, which is a poor plan. On a Tuesday, he mouthed off to a man with a slow smile. On Wednesday, the slow smile man waited by the microwaves in the day room. On Thursday, the notorious man asked a guard to move him. "Why?" the guard asked. "Because I can feel it coming," the man said. The guard filed the request. Administration stamped it. The move was set for Friday. On Thursday night, the power blinked. It was a small outage, just a shrug from a winter storm, but it was enough. In 20 seconds, the unit that held the notorious man went dim. Not black, but dim enough for someone to close distance. By the time power fully returned, officers were already shouting, the alarm was already up, and the medical kit was already open. The man was hurt, not dead. The unit went to lockdown. The move happened at dawn with an escort that looked like a parade no one wanted to cheer for. Sometimes the difference between a story and a tragedy is a breaker that doesn't trip, the captain said later. Even with quick moves and heavier watches, The prison couldn't catch every fuse before it burned down. In another wing, a different kind of notorious man. The kind hated not for what he did to rivals, but for what he did to people who were supposed to be safe, worked a job sorting laundry. Work crews mixed people who would never share a chow table, because bleach and cloth don't care about politics. Most days the job was dull. Tie, load, press, repeat. On a Monday, dull turned into dangerous. A push, a shout, a moment too quick for cameras, an officer's voice on the radio like a hammer hitting steel. Medical to laundry, the voice said. Now. Does he make it? Daniel asked the officer later. Not long, the officer said. The record shows a time of death. The rumor shows 100 words for why. In the weeks that followed, 100 letters arrived from 100 miles away. Angry letters, thankful letters, letters with no return address. None changed the reality. Another notorious inmate, murdered behind bars. The warden walked the tiers more after that, not just because cameras don't catch everything, but because faces do. He stopped at cells not to chat, but to take the temperature of the room the way doctors touch a patient's forehead. He talked to officers in quiet corners instead of offices where the door's glass makes shoulders stiff. What are we not seeing? He asked. Show me the blind spots. Blind spots hid in plain sight, the angle of a camera that left a seam of shadow along a wall. A routine that had become so routine, no one noticed it was a pattern others could predict. A shortcut in staffing that made sense on paper and no sense on a tier where 2 officers should stand and only one did. One afternoon, a counselor named Ms. Alvarez, who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time, stopped a fight before it started by telling a joke so awful the 2 men who were about to swing paused to groan. She smiled. Later she told the captain. They didn't want to laugh, but the laugh broke the string. You can't tell that joke every day, the captain said. I hope I don't have to, she replied. Not every day held a tripwire. Some days were low and ordinary. Those days mattered too, because they kept people from stacking up their anger like bricks. On those days, GED class ran without someone slamming a book. In the kitchen, the bread got counted and none went missing. In the yard, men did laps and traded talk about football instead of threats. These low days didn't erase the high ones, but they trimmed the fuse. Still, the list in the captain's desk drawer didn't it'd go away. It changed. Someone crossed off a name with a hard line. Someone else added 3 more. If you looked at it too long, you could feel heat in the paper. The captain let as few eyes see it as he could. Sometimes a list is just a scarecrow, he said. Sometimes the crows don't scare easy. A week after the laundry room murder, a rumor walked the prison faster than any officer could. A transfer in from out of state, a notorious name with a past as loud as a parade. It wasn't just any name. It was a name that had been on front pages and in closing arguments. A name that split rooms at family dinners. The kind of name that made even men who pretended not to care look up when the chain bus braked. Tell me that's a joke, a sergeant said when the roster pinged his screen. It's not, the captain said, and we're not going to make jokes about it. Protective housing filled fast. Every slot was a promise. We'll do our best to keep you alive. Promises are heavy. When officers carried that weight, they checked doors twice. They checked each other too. Your post okay? Need water? You good if I step off for 60 seconds? In a place where seconds cost, 60 can be a loan you can't pay back. The transfer rolled in under gray sky. The bus hissed, doors opened, chains clicked. The men on the work crew pretended to be bored. Their eyes were not bored. The notorious man kept his head down. He had been in more dangerous rooms than this, but not one where so many strangers had time to plan what they might do with 5 unwatched heartbeats. The warden walked with the group past the intake cage. He didn't say the man's name. He didn't have to. Names travel without mouths. He did say one thing, low and even, to his own people. No mistakes, he said. Not one. For a few days, it worked. The new man was moved like a secret. Off hours, short steps, no patterns. He ate alone. He showered with a staff member posted too close to blink. He asked for reading material and got a thin legal pad instead. He wrote in small letters, neat and careful. The warden allowed a call that went through 2 phones and 3 ears. Then came a morning that felt like any other until it didn't. The alarm didn't chirp first. It howled. An officer's voice, tight in the throat, said words no one wants to say at work. Unit 7, code, code. The captain's room emptied fast. Boots on concrete, radios answering radios, responding. On my way. Who's closer? A nurse ran with a bag that never stops being too heavy. The warden didn't run. He walked like a person who knows he must arrive with a steady face. When he reached the door, he saw what the guard had seen. A life that had taken up too much air on the outside had been snuffed in a place with no air at all. Daniel filed the time. The officer wrote the report. The nurse did everything she knew how to do, and then did the hardest thing. She stopped. The hallway filled, and then it emptied as people were sent to their marks. Lockdown, count, inventory, interviews. The news would have the story by noon. By then, the prison would be clean on the surface and shaking underneath. Inmates would press their faces to the glass of their door windows to get a sliver of information. Officers would talk in tight circles and short sentences. Phones would ring and not stop. The warden stood in the captain's office, staring at the list in the drawer without taking it out. We rerouted traffic, he said. Not to anyone, not really. We rerouted, and they still found the road. The captain didn't argue. He picked up the radio, set it down, picked it up again. He looked like a man who had slept in his boots for a month. Outside the unit, the low city of prison life tried to carry on. Trays delivered, laundry sorted, a GD lesson about paragraphs that kept 3 men from thinking too hard for exactly 45 minutes. But the hum had a new note. The electric sound of a story born that everyone would tell, a little different, and all the same. Daniel went back to the file room. He slid a new empty box onto a shelf. He didn't write the name yet. He couldn't. He held the marker in his hand like it weighed 5 pounds. He thought about the other boxes and the other names and the dates that made a line anyone could trace with a finger from yesterday back to decades ago. In a prison, people say time is flat. It isn't. It's stacked. Every story sits on top of another, and sometimes the stack leans too far. The radio crackled again. All supervisors to admin, a voice said. Immediate. Daniel set the marker down. He listened to the silence after the radio went quiet. In that silence, he could hear the shape of what was coming next. The interviews, the camera checks, the shuffle of transfers that would touch men who had nothing to do with the morning and men who had everything to do with it. He could feel the weight of families learning news they never wanted. He could feel the way the title of a story, 50 Notorious Criminals Who Were Murdered Behind Bars, wasn't a headline in a library. It was a drumbeat that would not stop. And then the door opened, and the captain stood there, eyes brighter than the lights. He didn't step in. He didn't sit down. He said one sentence that changed the room's temperature. There's another name on the list, he said, and he's missing. The marker rolled off the desk and hit the floor. The prison drew a sharp breath. And the hunt, inside the walls, under the cameras, through the blind corners, began